Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. So the question today is whether we need over 100 different federal programs to manage broadband and broadband deployment. And maybe a better question is, did you have any idea there were that many? Be right back. Thanks for joining me, Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News. So yeah, there's over 100 broadband programs out there. There was a report that came out last week from the Government Accounting Office that kind of laid that all out. Was something that was done to try to figure out what we can do to avoid waste and what's going on in that situation. So I thought I'd talk about that a little bit today, and at the end of this broadcast I will link to that report so you can look at all the details yourself. But first, I thought we'd look at this article that just kind of talks about some of the issues. So yeah, the question here, do we really need 100 different federal programs to fund broadband? I think emphatically we can say, no, we don't. We don't need nearly that many, but that's kind of the situation that we're in. So this report was done, and there's certain recommendations that they make after the end of it. So again, I'll show some of it, and we'll link to that at the end. So it says here, a new GAO, that's a Government Accounting Office report, finds that the government lacks a national strategy with clear roles, goals, objectives, and performance measures. Is that really surprising? If you follow federal government, maybe not. Although I do have a sense that they're trying to do the right thing. Part of that has to do with kind of concentrating some things under the NTIA, to try to have one, especially with all of the funding that's coming out with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the NTIA and the Commerce Department taking a big role in that, and then trying to be the coordinating agency between all of the states and any other agencies that are managing broadband programs under the IIJA. And I believe also trying to help coordinate and make sure that we're not overlapping funding from other programs. So that's a good thing. And the other thing is obviously just the fact that we have this report. The government is trying to self-police here and saying, let's take a look at this and see what issues we have and what we need to do to correct that. So here it says President Joe Biden's bipartisan infrastructure bill, that's the IIJA, 1.2 trillion, and it designated $65 billion to help ensure that every American has access to reliable high-speed internet. This included a $45 billion Internet for All program, under which Biden pledged to expand broadband access to all Americans by 2030. That was kind of a secondary marketing thing they did, because that program actually encompasses the broadband funding, the 42 point something billion in BEAD, plus some Digital Equity Act money that was in the Infrastructure Act. I don't think that didn't include the Affordable Connectivity Program, but basically it's taking some money from the IIJA and it's saying, let's call this an Internet for All program. And that's where they also announced that they got together with a bunch of ISPs who committed to providing a low-cost broadband option that would be $30, and therefore under the ACP, that's the Affordable Connectivity Program, $30 subsidy, that would actually be free for people that qualify for low-income kinds of programs. So that's what the Internet for All program thing is. But again, that's all part of this bipartisan infrastructure bill, or the IIJA. Says, but this was not the first tranche of federal funds dedicated to expanding internet access. The 2009 stimulus bill allocated more than $7 billion toward broadband grants for rural areas, and expenditures have grown since. A new report from the GAO shows that the return on that investment has been underwhelming. The report, titled Broadband National Strategy Needed to Guide Federal Efforts to Reduce Digital Divide, that's the title, was released on Tuesday. That was last Tuesday. What it found was a jumbled mess. Federal broadband efforts are fragmented and overlapping, with at least 133 programs administered by 15 agencies. The three largest being the FCC, the USDA, and the NTIA, which is part of the Department of Commerce. Between fiscal year 2015 and 2020, these programs collectively dispensed at least $44 billion in broadband assistance. In practice, so many programs from so many agencies, all pursuing the same goal, leads inevitably to waste. In one case, the report cites multiple providers received funding from different programs to deploy broadband to the same county in Minnesota. Unfortunately, this is nothing new. There's a history of waste when the government spends a ton of money on broadband. Evan Schwartzarber, a former FCC advisor and a senior advisor for the Lincoln Network, tells Reason. broadband programs are run by too many agencies, too many jurisdictions, and they're not coordinated effectively. There's no sense that this is being tracked in a coordinated way to make sure that we're not duplicating and to make sure that money is going to people who actually need it. Now, this is on Reason, I guess Reason Online magazine. So this is a conservative viewpoint, and these folks a little further down, they talk about municipal broadband, and they talk about the fact that the Biden administration is really pushing municipalities to roll out broadband, and government doesn't do that efficiently, it can waste money, that kind of thing, and private sector is best. The whole purpose of this site, if you look at it, I thought I saw it on here somewhere. I can't find it. There was a tagline about private sector stuff. So their whole goal is more the conservative side, letting the private sector do things and keeping the government out of things because they don't do things efficiently. So you need to take that perspective in mind with a grain of salt as you read through this. Now, I do tend to agree with a lot of these things. I'm conservative as far as fiscal matters, and I do agree with them. And actually, the Government Accounting Office agrees with them, certainly on these high-level points. So I wanted to show that. So here it is. This is the report, National Strategy Needed to Guide Federal Efforts to Reduce Digital Divide. It says what the GA found. This is just the summary page, and this is all I'm going to show. There's lots that you can read through here if you want to look at all the gory details. But federal broadband efforts are fragmented and overlapping with more than 100 programs administered by 15 agencies. Many programs have broadband as their main purpose, and several overlap because they can be used for the purpose of broadband deployment. And you do see that. Obviously, something like the BEAD program is all really about broadband, whether that's deployment, trying to make it affordable, trying to make, improve adoption, those kinds of things. It's all related to broadband. There are other programs where that money can be used for, economic development or things like that, and broadband is one piece of that. Despite numerous programs and federal investment, $44 billion from 2015 to 2020, millions of Americans still lack broadband. So we have thrown a lot of money at this problem, and we still don't have broadband for everyone. So the question is, can you keep throwing a lot of money at that? And especially if you're not doing it efficiently, or you're overlapping things or building in the same place twice. So, as they looked at all these programs, you can see some of the overlap here. This is kind of a confusing graphic, but as you look at these things, you do see that there are some issues that need to be addressed. Agency officials said programmatic differences, including some set by statute, limit the ability to align programs. For example, programs may have differing definitions of eligible areas, populations, and broadband speeds. And that's interesting because some of these things that came out years ago, the definition for broadband was lower because at that point, if somebody got a 25x3 connection, they were thrilled, right? Because that was fairly fast at the time across most of the nation, because some people were struggling with less than 10. At one point, 10 was considered high, and that was the bar. So, as you still got these programs out there that are still able to fund broadband, but yet the definitions have changed. So it's hard to sync these things up. It says here, NTIA is responsible for coordinating telecom matters across the executive branch, and at the end of 2020 gained additional responsibilities for improving broadband coordination. And that's true, and that's a good thing. So again, I think they're trying to address this by having the NTIA take on a lot of this to coordinate so there's one central agency that's looking at these other agencies and everybody's trying to work together. Improved alignment is needed to help address fragmentation and overlap. Without legislative proposals for Congress to consider, agencies may continue to face limitations in aligning programs to close the digital divide. That's a good example. You're going to have to I think the executive branch is going to have to get involved to lead, just like a CEO at a company would lead. And if you've got different departments that aren't all coordinated, you want to make sure they're all on the same page and we're all rowing in the same direction. So the executive branch has to take that on, but also Congress, because there may be things in here where legislatively, speeds were different, or there are things that are not aligning. The executive branch needs to put forward some kind of legislation, or the party in charge needs to put forward some legislation that would help synchronize these things. So we've got these old programs out here. Let's go ahead and synchronize some of the definitions, bring that up to date. And frankly, I think they need to have legislation that just moves some of the money from where it is today into the NTIA so they can manage it, rather than have all of these other departments be involved. It says here, The U.S. broadband efforts are, actually, did I get that? Yeah. Oh yeah, improved alignment is needed to help address fragmentation and overlap without legislative process. Yeah, I mentioned that. Okay, so the U.S. broadband efforts are not guided by a national strategy with clear roles, goals, objectives, and performance measures. The Executive Office of the President has not decided if a national strategy is needed, but it is well positioned to develop and implement one. A strategy to help better align programs could also include legislative proposals for Congress. Without such a strategy, federal broadband efforts will not be fully coordinated and thereby continue to risk overlap and duplication of effort. And they have their recommendations here again in the summary page. It says GAO is making 3 recommendations, including 1, that NTIA identify key statutory limitations to program alignment and develop legislative proposals as appropriate, and 2, that the Executive Office of the President develop and implement a national broadband strategy. NTIA agreed with our recommendations. The Executive Office of the President did not take a position on our recommendations. So the department within the administration, the NTIA, has agreed with it, and I'm assuming that hopefully the executive branch or the president, the administration, will agree and make some kind of coordinated effort to make this happen, because it really does need to come from the top down. So the NTIA can follow whatever the executive branch says and take care of that. And, a good example, I was saying that they should probably move funds from one place to another, or, yeah, really that's kind of what happened. If you look at the emergency broadband benefit that came out, that was part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act. It was like $3 billion, I think, 2-point-something billion, if I remember, of money that went to households that had suffered through the pandemic. So people lost their job, and this was a way that they could get a $50 subsidy toward an internet account, so that they could then, again, having lost their job, they needed maybe internet to be able to get a new job because they were laid off or whatever because of the pandemic, and that benefit went on through, and then it was ongoing, and then the IIJA was passed, and they passed the Affordable Connectivity Program, and then that money from the emergency broadband benefit was transferred over to the ACP. Now, it still remained under the FCC. I believe the FCC is in charge of both of those. So it was originally the EBB, and then it became the ACP, and the funds that were not used as part of the EBB were moved over to the ACP, part of the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed. So that's an example of taking money that was not yet allocated. We had this new program that came out, and specifically in the legislation, it said that those funds were to move over to the ACP. So that was a good thing. They were thinking ahead. But why does that even need to be under the FCC? Maybe all of these programs, you've got the USDA Reconnect now. I'm sure somebody was thinking at the time that you've got farms out there, and you've got rural broadband and all these areas that are not served, and we need somebody that understands that area. And the USDA was a good, solid choice for that, I guess, when they were thinking that way. But then you've got all these other programs. You got the FCC getting involved. You got the NTIA getting involved. And now a lot of the NTIA is managing funds that are all meant to go everywhere in the United States, regardless of whether it's farmland or whether it's an urban area where it's low income. It's meant to provide better broadband throughout the country, including farmland. So why not take funds that are with the USDA, funds that were with the FCC, and through a process of legislation, change whatever things need to be changed as far as synchronizing speeds and those kinds of things, and move that money over to the NTIA. Another example would be RDOF. So you've got RDOF funds out there that are being allocated right now. That's all under the FCC. That was through a reverse auction. And there's a lot of money that I think is not going to be awarded to people that won those auctions, that had the lowest bid of how much money, or the least amount. They said they would accept the least amount of support, and they were the ones that won the auction in a particular area, in a particular census block. And there's people like Starlink. There's LTD Broadband, one of the biggest winner. There's a few others out there that may not get funded. So what happens then? And I've been asking that question. I haven't gotten an answer back from the FCC. Maybe because they don't know, and maybe they're thinking about it. Maybe they're thinking about what they could do. Well, here's my suggestion. Obviously, if somebody won an auction, then RDOF, they should get the RDOF funds. They should try to get that out before the FCC maps are completed, so we know that that money is being allocated to a certain area, and that's no longer on the map as far as what would be considered unserved or underserved. That should be done. But then they should also need to figure out before the maps are done who is not going to get funding, which census blocks are still going to be open, and then what do they do from there? I would not keep that money in the RDOF program. I would take that money and either stick it in a lockbox. There's no such thing, I guess, with the federal government. We know from Social Security, but I would stick that somewhere and wait until the BEAD money is allocated or all kind of, not necessarily allocated, but committed to, and then say, okay, where else do we need to put money? And then maybe you could take the money there. So that should all, in my opinion, transfer over to the NTIA. The challenging thing there, again, it's going to take some legislation, is that money is coming out of USAC or the Universal Service Fund. So that's not really tax money, so to speak. That's coming from consumers and their phone bills that they're paying. So that's where those RDOF funds come from. But again, that's a lot of money that could go toward broadband, but why, I don't know how they're going to balance the fact that there are going to be a lot of areas that are supposed to get RDOF funds that suddenly are not going to get them. And then, what do they do with those remaining millions of dollars that were going to be allocated? What can they do with that? So I would say somehow either transfer that to the NTIA or leave it in a place with the FCC, just kind of let that money grow, or do some other things with it to help improve, I would say, cost structures for rural providers, because that's really what that's meant for, is the rural providers that are out there trying to provide broadband in these areas that are much more difficult. A lot of times it's because there's very few customers per mile, or maybe, many miles per customer. It's difficult, it's expensive, it's hard to get to that customer, and then once you get to them, your management costs, managing that network, is much more expensive. If you think about it, if you're going to do a truck roll and you've got one customer every several miles, then you got to drive further. Gas today is very expensive, so you got to drive further. You've got more areas between your central office or head end and that customer where things can go wrong, and fewer customers to pay for all of that. So you have very few customers, a lot of network. So those funds really need to be not just for building out broadband in those areas, but for helping to manage the costs, to keep the costs reasonable for those providers that are going to do that. Because you can build out the network, but then it's still going to be very, very expensive to manage it. So they could take the funds, put them aside for that, really is what they should be doing anyway. All right, so again, I will go ahead and link to this here right when I'm done, but I think the answer to that question is, as I say emphatically, yes, we do not need over 100 federal programs for broadband. They're out there. Some of them are winding down, some of them are still going, and there's lots of overlap, but I think it can all be handled better. And as I said, I think I do give them points for trying to address this. I give them points for already saying that the NTIA is going to be trying their best to coordinate a lot of these programs and to kind of be a one-stop shop for a state, for example, or service providers that want to know how to engage these programs, but still very confusing, and there's a lot they can do to try to make it better. Thanks for joining me. Hopefully this was helpful. If so, click the little like button there, and if you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button on YouTube or down in the right corner of this video. So you'll see a subscribe button. Go ahead and tap that, subscribe, click the little bell, and you'll be notified when I'm live. Thanks a lot. I'll see you tomorrow for Tech Tuesday. I'm going to be talking again about our TrueVision diagnostics application for fiber, going through some more features of that. See you then. Bye-bye.